All right, there's a little notification, so I'm broadcasting, and I don't have much time today. I have interviews starting in the morning. I have to be at work at 6:45, so I am going to try to keep this under or about an hour, so that way I can wake up at. I need to wake up at like 5:30 at the latest, so that's going to be fun. And so there's still. I probably need to shave tonight too. Or I don't know if I want to risk shaving in the morning and having time for that because, well, it's not terrible. It's still scruffy, and I just got back from getting my hair cut. Okay, so last week I was talking about UPB. Let's see. Let's open up the link to the actual stream itself. Make sure audio comes. Okay, audio is coming in fine. And there's a pop-out chat in case anybody actually shows up, but I doubt anybody will. It seems that I have pissed off multiple communities. It is what it is. I apparently have a bad habit of pissing off people over the last couple of days or weeks. So I guess I'm not sure if that's a sign of a self-destructive behavior or not, but it's a and that came out of nowhere. I'm just thinking out loud that maybe I am failing miserably about trying to be a more compassionate person, and I am doing it all wrong because I'm letting my logic and reasoning and adherence to values lead me to conclusions and saying things that pisses other people off, and then they go and and it rubs people the wrong way, and they hold it against me and excommunicate me. Like if I am wrong, I would love to know why. But instead I get arguments of oh, you're just silly, or you're stupid, or you're a liar, or you're a hypocrite. Nothing but no substance behind it. I can understand if they say, oh, you're a hypocrite and here is why, but they never get to that here is why part. They just say, I'm a hypocrite, and when I ask them why, then it seems to be the, oh, well, if you're too stupid to understand, then I can't explain it to you. Yeah, that's a great argument. Yeah, great. Yeah, if it's so obvious, you should be able to explain it easily, but you can't, so you're just lashing out at me personally and not against the ideas that I've expressed or against my position. That's just sophistry 101. So one of the things that I did want to mention is JF did actually respond to some of my comments on his videos. So let me scroll down through those. Because this happened, I was starting to see these pop up during the stream last week, and I didn't get to them. So JF is John Guy Francois. That is it. Not John Guy, is it? Yeah, John Yepier Francois. I think that is how you pronounce his name. Wow, there's a lot of notifications in here. All right. Wow, how long ago was this? I know I got too many subscriptions, I guess. Let me. Did I scroll down too much? There we go. Okay. Well, that's the end of them, but I know he made more than just the one. Okay. So I made this comment I had watched about 45 minutes of his video arguing against the UPB, and actually the title of his video is Stefan Manilou's UPB Destroyed. And then the entire time he's going off on side tangents and nonsense rants. Yeah, so the comment I made is, so JF, why are you bothering to spend nearly 2 hours and 50 minutes talking in the language of English on the internet to debunk Stefan's arguments if you don't think that language has a meaning that people's senses of hearing and that people's senses of hearing doesn't allow them to understand the meaning that you are trying to convey? It's because about the 45-minute mark, he starts saying some ridiculous nonsense about you can say words and other people won't necessarily understand what you mean, which is, those were probably not his exact words. It's been over a week and a half since I watched this video, but that was the context of what he was saying. That was the summation of the idea he was expressing, and I'm just like, wait, you just said that I say things, but I don't have any. He's trying to say that he doesn't have any responsibility for the outcome of those things that he was saying, and also that he can't reasonably expect other people to listen to what he's saying and come to any kind of conclusion from that. But he sat there for 2 hours and 50 minutes, and this he made this argument about the 45-minute mark. I was like, well, if you actually think that, then you wasted 2 hours of everybody else's time. Well, I would say the entire video he's wasting everybody's time, because he starts off by saying that he doesn't believe in objective truth, which, yeah, he's like, oh, everything is relative. And I'm like, so you've just told everybody that there is no such thing as an objective reality when it comes to truth. So why would anybody bother to listen to the arguments that you're currently making? Because I'd be just like, yeah, I'd be like the dude, well, that's just like your opinion, man. That's what it comes down to. Everything becomes just JF's opinion. And okay, he can sit there for 2 hours and 50 minutes describing his opinion. But the counterpart of that is he's trying to get people to change their opinion, because this is something I'm pointing out in these comments. He is specifically making statements with the goal of changing people's mind to believe a certain way. He's not just describing his views. He's saying that Stefan is wrong. UPB destroyed. You can't destroy something if it's an opinion. You can't, like, I can't, my brother can't hop on here, or, S-Man or some other ham can't hop on here and say, chocolate ice cream is the best ice cream. And I'll be like, no, it isn't. You can't prove that chocolate ice cream is the best. Boom, destroyed. Because it's nonsensical at that point. If I just start ranting about how vanilla is the best, or, or I think I had some really awesome pumpkin ice cream a couple of weeks ago. I can be like, oh, pumpkin flavored ice cream is the best ice cream. And you're like, okay, at that point, it's his opinion versus my opinion. I can't destroy his opinion. Me liking pumpkin pie or me saying that chocolate is not good doesn't destroy his interest in chocolate ice cream. That's not a subjective category, or that's not an objective category. So it's just us arguing about which ones we are personally like better. There's no way to determine which one is actually superior. You can make jokes about, well, objectively it's pumpkin pie or pumpkin flavored ice cream, but there is no actual objective standard. It's a subjective category. There is no definitive correct response to what their favorite ice cream should be. Conversely to that, there's no penalty for liking the wrong kind of ice cream. Right, so there's no right type of ice cream, but there's no wrong type of ice cream. It's not like, oh, you like mint chocolate chip, all right, to the gulags with you. There is no punishment for liking a flavor of ice cream. It's not like, oh, you like that flavor of ice cream, get the hell out of my house. That doesn't happen. It's a subjective category. You can like mint chocolate chip, and you can be a horrible, disgusting person for it. You can say that pumpkin flavored ice cream is terrible. Oh well. My like of pumpkin ice cream, and I also had some like what was that called? It was a butterscotch blondie or something. That was pretty good too. But I don't like chocolate chip ice cream. If somebody offers me some, I'm probably going to say, but somebody else can like it all they want, and that doesn't affect me. But it would become an issue if they tried to knock my ice cream out of my hand and say, no, you can't eat that garbage. You have to eat mint, and then try to shove a mint chocolate chip down my throat. That doesn't happen. That's not a thing in the world. That's not something that you can, nobody gets attacked for liking a specific type of ice cream, and nobody has the ice cream shoved down their throat. I mean, it's possible, but like I'm not saying it's impossible for that to happen, but I mean, it doesn't happen. It's not a common practice. It's not, if it has ever happened, which is unlikely, it was an extremely isolated incident. Anyway, but meanwhile, trying to bring things back, JF is trying to tell somebody they are wrong. How can you tell somebody they are wrong while also arguing that nothing is wrong? Nothing is inherently right or wrong, which is JF's position when he's talking about everything is relative. He actually tried to argue that square circles can exist because he was using taxi cab geometry, which is, for all intents and purposes, it's a simplified way of discovering a unit of distance without going through complex measurements in order to find, hey, it's because it's using a grid system as opposed to traditional Euclidean geometry, which actually you've got to use the radius and pi and things like that to figure out the length. But if everything to circles, it's much easier to calculate distances. The problem is, you're not calculating the exact distances. You can't use taxicab geometry to correctly calculate things when you're talking about the arch of a bridge structure or the circumference of a tire that needs to go on a vehicle. Taxicab geometry would create disasters. It would create bridges that would collapse and vehicles that would not drive. It's not a practical. It's a simplified version of geometry that helps in specific instances where the accuracy is not as important. But he's trying to say that you can have a square circle in such a method. And I'm like, there are still circles in taxicab geometry. They are represented as squares. That does not mean the circle is a square. They are represented as a square to make the math easier. It is less accurate, but it's easier to calculate airlines. That's the gist of it. And he's trying to make the claim that you can have two diametrically opposing ideas true at the same time. Something cannot be implicitly. So JF completely misunderstands taxicab geometry, and even a cursory glance at the documentation, because I'd never heard of it before he mentioned it. So I was like, okay, I got to double check. And I'm like, okay, reading through multiple sites where they talk about what this actually is, JF is completely incorrect when he's saying that taxicab geometry creates square circles. It does not. Circles they are not equal to squares, because the definition of a circle is all points on that line are an equal distance from a central point. With a square, that is not true. Therefore, you can't have a square circle. A square has to, by definition, have 4 90-degree angles. A circle has no angles. It has no sides. So the two definitions at the same time. That's the idea of the square circles do not exist. Something cannot be both true and false at the same time. Yet JF would disagree with that. So it makes no sense why he would make an entire almost 3-hour-long stream or 3-hour-long video what he would consider somebody's opinion. It's ridiculous. You cannot rebut opinions. You can only rebut objective facts. And that's That's the point I'm trying to get across to him, but apparently that's not. He's either too stupid to get what I'm saying. He has I don't remember if he works for a university or if he's got his PhD or something along those lines. Because I mean, I don't keep up with this guy because he's an idiot who believes in. He is. I don't know if he's quite a white nationalist because he didn't seem to be on board with Richard Spencer in that debate. But he is definitely anti-Jew when it comes to that whole debate, and you can see it all over his comment section, and he's in full support of the Jews shouldn't exist or something about white supremacy, and I'm not quite sure of the specifics on his particular view. It's just absolutely idiotic from anything I can tell because race does not matter. Race is inconsequential in the long run. Somebody who thinks that race is important. Now, I do have to make this caveat. So we do know that there are biological distinctions and IQ distinctions when it comes to the different races. Okay, that's a thing. But that does not make one race superior to other races or anything like. It's saying, hey, there's a difference here. That means certain races have natural advantages in one area or another. But no one race is better at everything than every other race. There's like Asians have really high IQs and generally are more financially successful. But overall, average height for Asians is lower than anybody than all the other races. It's that they're on the low end when it comes to height, when it comes to average physical size, as average physical strength. How many Asians are winning Olympic gold medals? Not very many of them. But Asians are all over STEM fields. Now, if you look at another race, okay, so African Americans generally, as averages, and here's the other part, you cannot apply averages for a group to an individual. It doesn't work like that. These are just broad general trends for understanding a category. But when you meet somebody, you can't treat them as if they are the average, because the average is not even the average. And this is something I'm learning as we're going through the course right now, is because the average is an approximation, but the average can be skewed greatly by outliers. For example, if you have a test of where 10 people took the test and maybe actually let's do a smaller number. Okay, 3 people took the test. 2 of those people got a 50 and 1 got a 100. Well, if you average, maybe I should do 4 because it makes it easier. So 4 people, 2 of them got 50, 1 got 75, and 1 got 100. There we go. Is that still going to work out? No, I think I need to do, I shouldn't have tried to make up an example. Okay. You have a test with 4 people taking the test. Let's do 1 person got a 0, 2 people got a 50, 1 person got 100. Well, now you have 200 points divided by 4. That would give you the average. And so the average of this class would be the average of your class got 50% on the test, which would be a failing grade for everybody in the class. And yet you had 1 person who failed miserably, 2 people who actually got a 50, and 1 person that got a 100. And yet it looks as if everybody got half the way. The 2 outliers would be the 100 and the 0. They would skew the metrics and make it look like the average was 50. Actually, that may be a bad example because there is 2 50s. Let's see if I do. Let's see. There's got to be a better way of adding these together to get a easily divisible number. Okay, let's start with 10 then. Okay, because 10 would be easily divisible. You have one person that got 100, 1 person that got a 0, and then that would mean 8 people in between. Now I have to write this out because it's too many numbers to keep track of. Okay, it's the idea of outliers, skew metrics. So, man, I'm trying to think of a better example. I'm trying to come up with one on the fly, which isn't quite working in my favor. So instead of a test where the max range would be 100, let's say average income, because that would be a little bit easier, and you could have 3 people. So you've got one person who earns an average, or who earns, let's say, 10,000 a year, and then another person who earns, let's go with 90,000 a year, and then another person who earns 1 million a year. So your total is 1,001,000, which if you divide that by 3, sorry, no, 1,100,000. Let's just do that real fast. If I can't do that one in my head, so the 11 divided by 3, the average would be 36,000, which is lower than the middle guy. So there's one guy who got 10,000 a year, one guy who got 90,000 a year, and one guy who's making 1 million a year. Their average would be 36,000 a year, which is far below the guy who's making 90,000 a year and far below the guy who's making 1 million a year. They are offset dramatically by the outlier, the guy who's making 10,000 a year. Similarly, that number is skewed higher for the guy who got 10,000 a year because there's a guy who's making 1 million a year. The average isn't close to the middle. So when you're talking about average IQs, that's not a very good metric when you're considering IQs overall. So but it does kind of point is, generally speaking, once you rule out the outlying, the outliers that would skew that average, if that average is within normal distribution of standard deviations, then you can expect about 50% of the people to be below that number and about 50% to be above that number. Now, what I'm learning is that average is not a very good metric because it can be skewed by outliers. Median is better because that would be exactly the 50% mark. And also, we're learning percentiles is an even better metric because it's, rather than the number of the 50%, there's a, let's see, oh man. Yeah, the median is the 50% mark exactly. So when you're looking at, we should actually, in statistics, when they're doing these, the average salary and the average, they should actually look at the median as opposed to the average. And I don't know if that's actually quite calculated in these statistics. But percentiles is overall a better number when you're talking about, when you want something that is accurate and actually something that is easily to understand, because you can understand, and this is how the ASVAB works. So I got a 95 on the ASVAB, my brother got a 96. That is the 95th percentile, which means I did better than 95% of the people taking the ASVAB. My brother did better than 96% of the people taking the ASVAB. And I don't know if that's over the course of that single year or that month or how exactly that works, but we're both in the top 5% of everybody who took the ASVAB within that given set of time. That's easy to understand, top 5%. Percentiles is much easier. It should be used more often when trying to determine these sorts of things. And I wish I could find a breakdown of IQ by percentiles. Haven't found anything along those lines yet. But so right now, the most accurate numbers we have are averages. Anyway, that's a huge side tangent when talking about IQ. JF is one of those people who uses the IQ to say that whites are better than blacks and that Asians are better than blacks. He's trying to use science to justify racism. When Stefan Monolu talks about this, it is to point out, yes, there are differences between the races. That doesn't mean one is better than the other. It can lead to situations where races may not be compatible. He's not talking about genetically or anything like that, but to get along side by side, because there may be other mitigating factors that we can't quite count for when we're talking about we should all just get along. And it's like, well, maybe there's biological factors that are preventing this. And this is why when cultures or when groups of people are in close proximity to each other, rather than coming together and working as a unit, it tends to fragment, and they tend to fight each other, and they tend to, impose their wills upon each other. That he goes out of his way to state over and over again that he hopes that that is not the case. He's saying the science seems to point in that direction, but he's looking for any type of evidence that would point to the contrary, that yes, we can get along without having to segregate based on race. Now, I think the scientific argument is kind of unfortunately, in favor that, yeah, races should generally keep to themselves, because when you try to force them to work together and force them in close proximity to each other, it leads to war, it leads to violence, leads to civil conflicts and things along those lines. That's been Now, if people naturally start integrating, okay, but the problem there is it's not very common for people to naturally integrate with other races and that sort of thing. It is a very slow process, and usually it's not the majority of the people who are involved in mixing those groups together. It takes a very long process, and that's again what I talked about last week with the wall, and why it doesn't make any sense for cultures to come full force together, because there's no time for people to be acclimatized. I think that's not the right word, but I can't think of a better word at the moment. So basically, if you've got the United States, and everybody in the United States generally has the same racial mix-up and generally has the same, religious belief and general, political beliefs and all that sort of thing, and then you've got this massive influx of people with completely different race, completely different religion, completely different views of the world, and views of political activity. They need time to become part of the whole, to become a homogenous unit again. If you just add them in, and then you just keep adding and adding and adding, eventually there is no time for the thing. It's rather than all changing to be one homogenous unit again, or one homogenous community, instead you get either a complete separation like oil and water, or you get a situation where the original thing becomes something completely different than what it started out as. So I'm trying to think of a good example of that, but the best one I can think of is okay, let's say you've got a gallon of water, of distilled water. Well, you can add a little bit of salt water to that, right? You can, like ocean salt water, you can add, maybe a few ounces of it, maybe a full pint. And yes, if you tried to drink it, so if you added a pint of salt water to distilled water and then you tried to drink it immediately, you would taste mostly just the salt water. But if you sat there and stirred it for a while and let it mix thoroughly and disperse evenly, and then you tried to drink that distilled water, it's more than likely, because of the quantity difference, you wouldn't even taste, you might taste a slight difference, but it wouldn't taste that salty. Now, mix that on the other hand, it's like, okay, you've got a gallon of water and you mix a half gallon of salt water in there and you just pour it on, and then you just keep adding pints and pints. Well, eventually, that's going to be such a concentrated mix of salt water that's going to be more salt water than, actually, I think a better example would be, you've got a tap that's pouring distilled water, or I guess fresh water, and then you've got another, what was that called? There's a term for that, right? Where the ocean, where fresh water from rivers meet the ocean, and it creates kind of like a saltwater or freshwater mix. Oh, what's the name of that thing? I'm going off on tangents. Sorry. This is why I normally like having other people on here to keep me in line. But it's the idea that if you want something to remain freshwater and you keep adding salt water, eventually that salt water is going to become large enough to notice. Actually, I think a better example would be like a pool, and if you keep adding salt water, yeah, it's only a little bit here and there, but you just keep adding salt and adding salt and adding salt. Eventually, if you swim in the pool, you're going to start to feel the grains rubbing up against your skin. You're going to, you open your eyes underwater, or whatever. You're going to, I guess maybe it's a little bit easier than chlorine, but you're going to start to see the effects of that salt in the water. It's going to change a little bit. The water, the pool can handle and can absorb and can mix evenly, and it's not all that noticeable. It's still, but the more and more you keep adding without the chance of that distributing, the more and more you have a buildup and a concentration of the salt in that pool. That's completely too much over explanation, but oh, dude, I gotta get back to these comments. I'm never gonna get to the actual stuff I want to talk about at this rate. Okay, so, this is the rest of my comment. I guess you would claim that you were just talking to hear yourself talk and don't know the reason why you are saying anything, because that is almost verbatim what he said in that video, because he was saying, oh, well, how do you know that the person was trying to convince you of something? They could just be talking to hear themselves talk, and they don't know the reasons. I'm like, that's completely backwards. Now, something like that you could say about a parrot, because we know parrots, while they can be smart, they are mostly mimicking sounds that they hear. They can mimic other people's voices, but it is very, even if a parrot can mimic words, if you were to ask a parrot a question and they were not trained to respond to a question with a certain response, they wouldn't be able to critically think and answer on their own. They can only be trained or learn to communicate through habit, through repetition. They're not critically thinking about words that they are saying. They are, oh, this response, it's like when I do this response, I get either attention or I get food or something along those lines. And so they keep doing that response. It is learned behavior. It is not new behavior. Like parrots, even though a parrot could learn specific words, they couldn't fit those words into a sentence, into forming something completely new that their owner didn't teach them. Whereas humans have that ability. So it's understood that when humans actually mix words in a certain order, they are trying to convey a particular idea. They aren't just randomly saying words. Words are language. The entire premise of language is that words are arranged in a certain order to convey a specific meaning. According to JF, though, language isn't a thing, because people can just say things. There is no intent behind their words. This would also mean that for their words, which means JF is not responsible for his words, which means they're not his words if he's not responsible for them. And then why should anybody listen to JF? Because he is just a product of the environment that is forcing these words. It'd be like JF would be no different than a talking parrot if this were true. Actually, what I would be saying is no different from a talking parrot. So you should, if this were true, anything anybody says should be treated with the same regard that you would a parrot saying things at random. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, so his response to me is, okay, I ended that particular statement by saying how anyone can fall for this mindless sophistry is beyond me, because that is sophistry. You're using language to say that language doesn't convey a meaning, but you just conveyed a meaning using language. It's self-contradictory, like textbook sophistry. Like when you go to understand the meaning of sophistry, this is probably the example they give. It's one of the earliest examples that I've ever heard when learning about sophistry, because this goes all the way back to Socrates, Plato, when people of their time and day were being called out by them for using these particular tactics. And your argument is self-defeating, and you just don't realize it, or you do realize it and you're hiding to you don't realize it. So his response to that was, you're the sophist, since I already addressed that. The idea of a common agreement of meaning between two individuals does not demonstrate universal truths. Well, that's not what I said. Because that's a completely irrelevant argument to what the actual underlying argument is. Whether two people agree or not is not the situation. What is important is that both people understand that agreement can be reached, and the way that that can be reached is through the use of communicating in the same language and following the same rules to reach that consensus. Maybe not a consensus in agreement, but a consensus in, yes, this is what you meant to say. This is the communication, or this is the idea that you wish to communicate to me. Both people, the person listening and the person talking, are operating under that understanding. That is UPB. Whether they agree or not is irrelevant. Whether they agree or not is irrelevant as long as they're both understanding that a method of communication, both of them must be using that same method of communication in order to send and receive ideas. And then he says intersubjective agreement is not universal truth. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because he's communicating this idea using a language which would be universal, in that if he wants to communicate with me and I speak English, he must speak to me using the rules of the English language. He cannot speak to me in Swahili. He can't speak to me in SQL. He can't speak to me in machine language. He cannot communicate his message just whistling or spouting random noises or clicking his tongue. If he's trying to communicate, he's sitting here writing words in English to communicate that idea to me. That means in order to achieve his goal, he understands these are the things I must do to communicate this to you. Because there are almost an infinite possibility of other actions he could do, and none of them would communicate this to me. The only way he could communicate what this is supposed to mean to me is by doing exactly this. There is a limited subset of actions in order to achieve a specific consequence that must be taken. That is UPB, those specific actions that result in a subset of consequences. Like, should be a very basic concept, and he's just, whether he's not getting it because he is Dunning-Kruger and that he's playing to be smarter than he is, or he's intentionally skirting around it, which that seems more likely because of the way he doesn't directly address what is being said. He skirts around it. He jumps to other arguments. He says things that are inherently contradictory and then acts as if he didn't say something that was contradictory. You call him out on his BS, and he says, no, I didn't say that, and that wasn't BS, even when you can show him a timestamp in his video where he said exactly the thing. Yeah, so it seems more dishonest rather than stupid. So my response is, it is universal, as there is a limited number of options. Yeah, this is exactly the argument I was just making. There's a limited number of options to communicate, but a near infinite number of options that would not result in a successful communication. Anyone desiring to communicate the idea that you are currently expressing would have to follow a subset of behaviors to do so. Exact same argument. Now, this was from 6 days ago. I didn't even reread this, but I was just giving my response, and I should have just read the response because this is worded better than I could say on the fly, thinking, because usually when I'm writing a statement, I have time to proofread it, and I'm like, okay, I could have worded that better. Whatever. That subset would be preferable to any side of that subset, yet you are arguing within the bounds of that subset that such a subset isn't required. if any action would achieve, I said would achieve you the same outcome. That you is just unnecessary. If any action would achieve the same outcome, then and only then would your communication be relative. Also, you are using universal incorrectly. So, oh, what is this? I think I was typing this on my phone, so the autocorrect. You ever get that where you type is and it turns, instead of writing is, it turns it into some other word, and then so I think that's what happened here. So you are using universal incorrectly, and then I say universal health. So another way, it should be universal is another way of saying objective. I don't know if it's too late to correct that or not. Stefan says in his book that universal preference could be stated as objective requirements. However, objective requirements would include things for which humans have no choice to follow. The big example he keeps coming back to is gravity. You don't have a choice to obey gravity or not. Building, even if you wanted and you chose to fly, you would still hit the ground because you don't get a choice on that. You are subject to those rules. Your choice doesn't change those rules. So morality specifically deals with actions that humans can choose of their own volition, which is why he doesn't say objective requirements. He uses the term universal preferences, which would be the subset of objective requirements, specifically dealing with the actions to which a human being gets to make choices on. Okay, so, and since you don't believe in objective, so this goes the rest of my comment, since you don't believe in objective truth, you're going to contradict that belief because you accuse me of being a sophist, accepting that it is my subjective truth that you are a sophist, and I am not. So, like, if this was a subjective category, then I could say that he is a sophist all I want, because that would be my version of the truth. Same, like I can say, I can say pumpkin ice cream is the best ice cream. That would be my preference. Similar, like, because it is a subjective category. So if it was subjective that he's a sophist, I could call him a sophist all day long, and that should not be some correct. He could say his opinion on himself where he isn't a sophist. Okay. But the very fact that he's trying to argue that he's not the sophist, I'm the sophist, means that this is an objective category, and you can find an objective to indicate that I am objectively a sophist while he is not, which I'm the person saying that objective truth does exist, which means he is a sophist based on the definition of sophist and based on things he said in that video. But he arguing against objective truth is saying that he is not a sophist and I am. Doesn't make any sense because he can't correct me. He can, in a subjective world, he can't correct my opinion, but he could state his own. But that's not what he's doing. Is he's correcting me and saying that I am wrong. Yeah, in a subjective category, you cannot be wrong. Okay, so everything is relative according to you, yet you insist that I abide by your relative truths. Rules for thee, but not for me. That is the classic mantra of the sophist. It's not what they say, but it's what everything they say communicates. Rules for thee, but not for me. It's not they will never say that verbatim, but everything that they say along those lines is they hold other people to a standard they do not hold themselves to. So whenever they make a rule for you, but not for themselves, they state it in an infinite number of ways. But the idea that rules for thee, but not for me, is consistent with a sophist. So, okay. Went too long on that. It's already 8:20. Maybe I didn't voice. Okay. So that was that little back and forth, and there was another one of these on a different video. So he made another video where he's talking about Stefan being a liar because JF is a bit of an idiot. He's a smaller channel than Stefan, and it seems more and more likely that he is just trying to use Stefan's larger platform, trying to pick a fight in order to grow his own audience, because more than likely his channel is either not doing well or is dying. I don't know. I don't know the metrics. It could be growing. I don't know. I hope not, because he says some very stupid things concerning race and his conclusions that. So while, like I said, I don't think he's quite on the same boat as Richard Spencer, where he thinks everything needs to be, ethnocentric and should ultimately lead to civil war and or genocide. But I do think he is, from what I've seen, from the things that he says, he seems to be in favor of the idea of white supremacy for whatever reason. So saying that Stefan said a potential lie implies that lies are objective and people's statements can objectively be lies. You are relativist, so whether Stefan lied or not should be entirely based on the perspective from which the statement was made. From some perspective, the statement is a lie, and from other perspectives, it would be the truth. What would it matter to you or to your audience if Stefan lied? What would it matter to you and your audience if Stefan lied, since lies are not objective? Yeah, that's. I think he actually responded to this. Okay. Although, for some reason, the comments are out of order here. So his response to that was, lies refer to facts, not preferences, which is an objective statement. So then he says, objective facts exist, but not objective preferences. And so my response is naturally, that's not what you said in your other video. A fact is defined as a thing that is known or proven to be true by and then I linked to the reference his other video. You described your relativist views by stating and then I get the time code 907, and I'm quoting him here. And I would tell you, I'm an agent of the world, and so my definition of truth. And then at 950, truth has a different definition subset of the ensemble of knowledge. I'm pretty sure that's what he's saying right there, is an ensemble, because he sounds like he's gargling someone's balls when he says it. So I think he means ensemble there. Truth has a different definition depending on what subset, the ensemble of knowledge, we are talking about. So he's saying truth is subjective. It's dependent on the situation. And yet he just told me the truths. And I'm like, but you're saying in your video here that he has a definition of truth where truth changes depending on the subset of knowledge. Okay, then I go on in my comment. Since you define truth in such a manner, then all one needs to do is change the current subset to another ensemble of knowledge and inform you that facts are not true. The only way to avoid that would be if you yourself adhered to the principle of non-contradiction. But you, and that 1125 in that video, also argue against that. According to your view, I merely need to imagine a world in which people evaluate truth in a different way, and I imagined a world in which people evaluated truth based on whether they enjoy listening to the mindless drivel of the victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect to it. So the one speaking in such a manner is untrue based on that criteria, and thus facts are not true but false. If you proceed to argue with me on this matter, you will be acknowledging that consistency is required in order for the truth to be evaluated, and then you would have to give up on your relativist views. And it's one of those things like, yeah, they want like relativity. And I'm like, well, relativity leads to these illogical conclusions where I can argue that everything you say is false because I don't like the way you argue, which is essentially the boiled down version of what I'm stating there. And then I go on to say, wow, dude, yeah, so most of this was written on my phone during my breaks at work. And by the way, at 5:35, you describe the existence of pi as merely a logical truth, or sorry, merely a local truth. And local truth is a weird thing. And if you look up local truth, the only instances you will find is when it comes to the idea that truth is relative. Is relativism and local truth. Local truth you won't find it under any other than when it comes to relativism and when it's talking about relative truths. Truths within a certain subset, but not universal truths. I'm like, well, then you just change the subset. If he says, well, that's a lie, and a lie is a rejection, would mean that it's a truth. And I'm like, well, it's only a truth within that certain subset, so I can just change the subset, and then it's no longer a truth. Nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. Okay, so 535, you describe the existence of pi as merely a local truth. If your claim is that pi is a local truth, I forgot the R there, claim, yeah, is a local truth. So if your claim is that pi is a local truth, then why isn't a lie a local truth as well? Both can be independently verified independently using, man, I said independently twice. So both can be verified independently using logic, observation, reasoning, axioms, and arguments. That is what makes them objective. Yet you claim one is an objective truth. Considering he says pi is a local truth and he said facts were objective truths. And then my question is, so why would you call pi a local truth and facts objective truths, and what distinguishes those two concepts from each other? Because both can be verified independently using logic, observation, reasoning, axioms, and arguments. What is the difference between pi and objective facts? What distinguishes them? Because there doesn't seem to be any distinction, because they seem to be in the same category, which I would consider objective. But he says one is a local truth and the other is an objective truth. Okay, so the only definition that I could find for local truth, man, I just said this, didn't I? Was from relativism, which states, yeah, so reading my comment, not, yeah. Okay, so the only definition I can find for relativism, which states, truth relativism is the doctrine that there are no absolute truths, i.e., so this is a quote, sorry, this is a quote from a site on this. Truth relativism is the doctrine that there are no absolute truths, i.e., that truth is always relative to some particular frame of reference, such as the language or a culture, cultural relativism. If this is what JF means, then you cannot accept any objective truth, such as the existence of a fact. A fact is an absolute truth. In the vast majority of philosophical disciplines, absolute, objective, and universal are all synonymous. So this is a trick of sophist as well. He was saying objective facts were objective truths. Pi was a local truth. And he was using universal as if something that was universally true would have to be true for all universes, going into the multi-universe theory, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You're like, no, universal means it's applicable to the entire category. It's, if you're talking about humans, something that is universal would be a universal remote is every electronic device that has a remote control. And here he is trying to argue, oh, that would be true. That would have to be true for all types of universes. But you could imagine that there's a universe that doesn't follow these rules. I'm like, that's not the definition of universal, you disingenuous liar. Disingenuous liars. I wanted to say another word, but I'm trying to not cuss as much. Yeah, absolute dishonest pig. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Yeah, but they like to play these mind games and say, oh, there's no such thing as absolute truth. There's no such thing as universal truth, but there's objective truth. I'm like, that's all the same thing. All the same thing. Absolute, universal, and objective are synonymous. They all have the similar or the exact same meaning. That you can use them interchangeably, especially when you're talking about the philosophy. But it's like there's absolute value and stuff like that in math. There isn't such thing as like objective value, and universal is a completely different concept in math. But in the realm of philosophy, absolute, objective, and universal are all interchangeable concerning the realm of philosophy. They are all communicating the exact same idea. And yeah, and anybody who tries to say there is such things as an objective truth, but there's no such thing, or there's no such thing as universal truth, yeah, they're playing word games. They're trying to trick you with language manipulation. I forget the exact fallacy, but it's like a substitution fallacy or definition fallacy or something along those lines. Where you either, so there's one where you change the definition of the word and you're using the word in a completely different definition, which is what he was doing with the square circles. He's using the word circle and he's describing something that is objectively not a circle. It doesn't fit the definition of a circle. So that was one trick that he was doing. The other way of this type of, or this similar fallacy is, instead of using the same word but using a different definition other than the one that you stated, is the idea of substituting one word for another and acting as if they are either two different words, or substituting a word for another and acting as if they are the same when they are two different words. Like what he was doing was saying, you know, there's local truths and objective truths. And I'm like, well, you're using them in the same manner, but you're stating that they're different. I think maybe that's not a good example. Let's see. It's more along the lines of, you would say truth and fact, and then you would start saying fact, and you would refer to things that are untrue, but still call them facts. That's one way of sophistry wordplay. You're like, a fact must be true, and so a fact, when you say, well, that's a truth, you could say fact, truth, but then you can't keep using fact to describe things that are untrue. And that's what sophists also do. They're like, well, this is truth and this is a fact, and they go on to state things as if they're facts, but they're, so even though fact itself has truth in its own definition, they will use facts to describe something that is inherently false. But they're hiding it behind of a fact and acting as if, oh, well, if I call this lie a fact, that will make it true. And you're like, it doesn't make it true. It's a lie, so you can't call it a fact. It's hiding. Yeah, it's word games. Okay. Yeah, I'm getting lost in tangents on tangents. I apologize for that. Nobody's here to keep me on track, so I'm going to keep going through this. Okay, yeah, so, oh man, I'm repeating myself. So in this comment I said, you proceed to talk about how squares can be circles, use taxicab geometry to do this stuff, but a circle by definition is a set of points that are equal as its corner. Thus taxicab geometry is changing the definition of a circle so that they can call their squares circles. This is another example of the word games you play with your audience, yeah. 2023, so here's another comment I made. So at 20 minutes and 23 seconds, you said, my task is Can these two things be true? Well, no, they can't be true unless further explanation is given. That is an objective claim. But if you have said in your video, but as you have said in your video on the UPB, you are a relative nihilist. So why are you making objective claims? As Stefan explained in this, explained the situation pretty clearly. So his argument in this video was something about Stefan claims that his step-grandmother is Jewish, but he's not Jewish. And then he's comparing clips from Stefan's videos and saying that Stefan might have lied. So here I go to explain the exact situation. So Stefan explained the situation pretty clearly in that he didn't know that she was his step-grandmother. For the vast majority of his life, she was his one and only grandmother. His real grandmother, or his biological grandmother, died long before he was even in the equation. And so the woman he knew as his grandmother was never referred to as his step-grandmother, but she was not his biological grandmother. So his entire life, he just knew her as grandmother. He found out fairly recently, and this is within the last 2 to 3 years, somewhere in that range, possibly 4 years, but somewhere in that range. It was relatively recently that she was his step-grandmother. So in some videos, he is saying that his mother was Jewish and that his grandmother was Jewish. But his mother was not Jewish because his biological Jewish. His step-grandmother was Jewish. And the reason he didn't find this out until more recently is because he had a very strained, he talked about that at length in other videos. You know, she was a terrible role model, was bringing people around the house that would beat Steph, you know, kind of a druggie, kind of a whore. I don't know if she was actually a prostitute, but, you know, kind of the free love and bringing strangers around, her kids, getting and, you know, creating a hostile environment at the home, blaming her kids for all of her problems. Yeah, it creates a strained relationship. He wanted nothing to do with her or her family. And it's only later in life when he's got a family of his own that he's trying to consolidate with that side of the family, you know. And then he finds out she wasn't his biological grandmother. He thought for, you know, 30, 40, actually, is he in his 50s? 40-ish something years that she was his biological grandmother, and only to find out, oh, my mother wasn't actually Jewish. My real biological grandmother wasn't Jewish. But my step-grandmother was Jewish, and that did have an impact on the way my mom was raised because they had to go and hide in 40s Germany, 1930s, 1940s. I forget I think he said 37 or 38. I don't remember the exact year that his mother was born. So she was born to the biological grandmother. I don't know if the biological child or after, but I think, I don't remember the exact age range, but she was somewhere, she was like 5, somewhere between 5 and 10 when the step-grandmother entered the picture. And the step-grandmother was Jewish, but that created a strain for the family because they're living in Berlin at the time when being a Jew is not a good thing. And it's very doubtful that his grandfather would just abandon his stepwife just because she's Jewish. And so then instead they had to go in hiding and all that sort of thing. Let's see. Maybe not necessarily hiding because, and so he talked about his mother being in orphanages and being hidden around the country. His mother would have been by blood or by religion, and it would have been easy for her to be, you know, just be a regular orphan in an orphanage and not be you know, sent to some concentration camp or something like that, which did her well. It was just she wasn't actually Jewish. There was just ties to Jewish, and they're trying to separate that guilt by association sort of thing. And then I conclude this little explanation of the actual situation So as someone who doesn't even believe in objective truth or reality, I don't see why any of this would matter to you in the first place. Yeah. So it's just gee whiz information, but why do you even care if you don't think there's any such thing as objective truth? Okay. So yeah, that dude, I went on way too long of a rant. It is already 8:40. I didn't even touch my notes on UPB, so let me quickly brief. So last week I started talking about UPB. And oh, okay. So this is the statement from the person. So that started the investigate or the that like, oh, hey, that's an interesting idea. I should talk about that. So there's a guy named Finn PC, or at least that's his screen name on Twitter, and he said in the chat group, I am familiar with UPB. I said for a while, but I found a problem with it. So one of the arguments is that truth is universally preferable to falsehood, which is not the argument, because in order to argue against truth, you must accept truth as preferable to falsehood. The problem, okay, so the actual argument is not that truth is universally preferable to falsehood. The argument is that if you are arguing, you are advocating, you are making the implicit claim that truth is universally preferable to. Finn is right here. I found a problem with it. Is stating objectively that something is not factual, something is not true, something is false, and it would be better if the truth was what he believed instead of what he okay, let me rephrase this. If Stefan Monalou is saying something and this guy is saying there's a problem with it in that it's untrue, he is saying Stefan Monalou said X, but I would rather that Stefan Monalou have said the opposite of X. Right? That's the idea. So by arguing against what Stefan is saying, Finn is saying that the truth is preferable to what Stefan is currently saying. That is the argument. The argument is not that truth is universally preferred over falsehood. The argument is that when you argue that something is correct and what the other person is saying is incorrect, you are implicitly stating that being correct is universally preferable to being incorrect. That is the argument. That's the argument Finn is missing. That's the argument that so many people are not understanding. So many people are misrepresenting this. Because look at his follow-up is the problem with this argument is that just because there is so he even takes it one step further. The problem with this argument is that just because there is no one with whom you can debate doesn't mean that. Did I copy that entirely correctly? The problem with this argument is that just because no one with whom you can debate doesn't mean that there is no such person who doesn't prefer truth over falsehood. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The problem with this argument is just because there is no one whom you can debate does not mean that there is no such person. Too many double negatives in here. So, okay, let me correct this. So the problem with this argument is that just because just because someone isn't debating you doesn't mean that a person no, it doesn't mean dude, there is so many negatives in here. Okay. Does not prefer truth over falsehood, which would mean does prefer falsehood over truth. So there is a person, there is a person who does prefer falsehood over truth. Man, this is worded so weird. And maybe that's just further to disguise. Okay, so if I understand this statement correctly, so I'm going to say it one more time. So this is the statement that was in the chat. The problem with this argument is that just because there is no one with whom you can debate doesn't mean that there is no such person who doesn't prefer. So if I understand the negatives in all of this, saying just because nobody's arguing against you, doesn't mean that somebody doesn't prefer falsehood over truth. Or wait, doesn't mean that there isn't a person who prefers falsehood over truth. That's my understanding of that sentence, although it is worded incredibly stupidly or incredibly difficult to parse out on purpose. Yeah, but the very fact that there could be someone who prefers falsehood over truth doesn't matter. It does not negate the fact that you yourself, Finn, are arguing that something is incorrect and the truth is preferable to that incorrect thing. It's okay. So another argument is that in order to live, you discuss. You have to eat, drink, and breathe. Therefore, eating, breathing, and drinking are universally preferred behaviors, and no person can argue against this without having chosen to do these things. That actually does sound like a correct summary of one of the arguments, or one of the supports that Stefan does make in the book. So the same problem remains here. Just because people who choose to kill themselves can't argue with you doesn't mean that they're wrong. Okay. People who chose not to eat, drink, and breathe are now dead. They can't argue for or against UPB. I don't understand how that would disprove UPB. Non-existence and non-arguments do not defeat arguments. How is this even a thing? Oh, if someone makes a claim, they can try to prove that, like, okay, so the burden of proof is on the person making the claim. I understand that. So Stefan has gone out of his way to support his arguments with, but now is calling his supports. Yes, so saying, yes, this appears to be truth, this is the hypothesis, and then he's testing it in the second half of the book and throughout the third half of the book, or well, he's broken up into three parts, I think, so I shouldn't say second half. So the second part of his book, and in the third part of it, he's like, okay, if this process is valid, I should be able to look at current moral claims, run it through the system, and get the expected output. Get that, yes, this would be a universally immoral behavior, and that would be a universally immoral behavior, and that would be amoral, and that would be moral, and those are the results he's expecting by going through this process. But it seems silly to try to say there is no argument being made against your idea, therefore you can't consider your idea to be true. Like, if a claim, in order to refute that claim, you must refute the supports and the claim itself, right? You knock out the entire thing. That's how you disprove it. You can't disprove someone's argument by saying, well, nobody's arguing against you, therefore you can't say that your argument is true. So it's the same, just because people who choose to kill themselves can't argue doesn't mean that they're wrong. They're wrong about what? Well, if they thought that they could survive without eating, drinking, and breathing, then yeah, they were wrong objectively. That's not relevant to the argument of UPB. But his argument seems to be that if people could somehow survive without eating, drinking, or breathing, then maybe those people would be able to argue against Stefan. That's completely nonsensical and doesn't hold up in the real world, because if you don't eat, drink, or breathe, you are going to die. Everybody who is currently trying to argue against the idea of UPB has already followed UPB to get to the point where they can argue. That's objective. You cannot. I don't understand how people think that. This Finn PC, just thinking about his arguments is hurting my head here. His arguments. Those people didn't do what was required to keep. They died, so they're not here to make an argument against Stefan. If they could have survived without eating, drinking, or breathing, then they could make an argument against Stefan, and then, hey, they would actually have a leg to stand on. Because, hey, I didn't follow UPB, and I'm still here, therefore this particular proof would be proven invalid. But those people don't exist. Those people can't exist. So this argument that he is proposing can't exist. Because it would have to come from somebody who has never followed UPB. But if somebody has never followed UPB, they don't live. Ugh. That's very much similar to JF's. Well, you could imagine other universes where this isn't the case. We live in this world where we follow the rules of this universe. I'm sure that, if other universes exist, there might be another universe where nobody has to work and everybody just and farts smell like roses, and and animals don't attack people. There's no poison. There's no no carnivorous animals. People just lay around on the beach. People lay around on the beach all day having sex. That would be the rules for that universe, not this universe. We live in this universe. We have to follow the rules of this universe, and the rules of this universe. If you want to stay alive, you have to follow UPB. So therefore, if you're arguing against UPB, your actions contradict that. Your actions contradict your words, and actions do speak louder than words. And the same, so this is something else we talked about last week. If you are making the argument that violence or might makes right, you wouldn't be arguing for that. Instead, you would be using physical force. So you are arguing something that you don't genuinely believe. And that's exactly what he's getting at with this particular point. If you followed UPB and you continue to follow UPB and you're arguing that UPB does not exist, you are arguing something that you don't genuinely believe. Because if you actually believed it, you wouldn't follow the practice of eating, drinking, and breathing. You would do whatever you wanted. And you would somehow continue to exist. That's how you would disprove him on this. Ugh. Okay, sorry. And I forget. So I think we got through 3 supports last week, and it's almost 9 o'clock. Dude, tomorrow's gonna be bad. Bad news bears. So I gotta wake up at 5. Let's see if it's 9 right now. 10, 11, 12. That's what? Oh, that'll be 8 hours. I'll be fine. All right, 9 to 5. Well, then I still gotta shave and shower tonight. So, I mean, they'll probably end up, if I can wrap this up in the next 10 minutes, that means I'd probably head off to bed in about half an hour. So it's like 7.5 hours of sleep. All right. Okay. Oh, no, I still gotta I still got work to do before I can head off to bed, so it'll probably be like 7 hours. It's still not too bad. Anything over 6 hours, you're good. Okay, so support number 4, saying that there is no UPB, objective requirement. So if there's saying that is no UPB, which I've put in my own parentheses, objective requirements. Sorry, this is support 4. Means that all other actions are equal in value. And so these are not the exact arguments he makes in the book. Some of this is me paraphrasing them, trying to, like, I'm expressing them in my own words to prove that I understand it, but also to help try to explain it in a different way. If you read through the book, you didn't understand it, or if you heard the audiobook and this is just another way of presenting that information. Maybe it's more palatable. This is the way that I understand it. So, yeah. So if you say that there are no UPB, it would be an argument stating that all actions are equal in value. Yet when people are given a choice between eating a meal and starving to death, they overwhelmingly choose to eat. He's just saying when people have the choice of eating, they choose eating. There are occasional people, he goes on to saying, yeah, there's anorexic people, there's bulimic people. You know, there are certain people who are on hunger strikes and they don't eat when offered food. But that is a small percentage. The vast majority of human choices, let's see. Yeah, so if all choices were equal in value, you would expect to see about a 50-50 split. Like, hey, when people are offered food and they are given the choice, like, okay, I can either eat or I cannot eat, and I can start, like, I can either starve to death or I can eat. When that is the choice before them, if all things were equal, you would expect to see about a 50-50 choice. You would expect to see about the odds of a coin flip. But we see something closer to like 99.999% of all people, when they're on the verge of starvation and you offer them food, they eat. That is a choice. It's not forcing food down their throat, saying, hey, here's food, your choice is between this food or starving. They like, oh, okay, I choose the food. And it happens majority of choices, which means that this would be eating food and not starving is preferable to starving. So he mentions a couple other areas along these lines, but that's just kind of the one paragraph summation of what he's talking about there. So half of this is, so there are a near infinite number of choices that people can make, and yet 99 point something percent of people actually, make choices that are within a subset of choices. Yeah, similar choices. Most humans on the planet throughout history make similar choices. Like, it is probably 99.99 repeating for a good while when you're talking about the entirety of human history, as far as the choices that are made by the majority of human society. Yeah, statistically, human choices could be represented on a chart with a coefficient approaching 1. Now, that's not, I don't think Stefan said that in the book. That was my, if you were to track all of human action throughout the entirety of human history on a trend line, that's ridiculous. That is nearly unheard of when you're talking about statistic. Like, that means there is a direct causal, there is a cause and relationship in play there. But if there were no UPB, rather than being at a trend of 1, you would expect to see 0. This leads us to, like, yes, there is a definite correlation and definite causation when you're talking about humans choose specific actions when they could choose any number of actions, any number of a near infinite number of actions. Like, rather than, okay, you've got a choice between starving and eating food, you choose to hop on one leg. You choose to start bashing your head into the wall. You choose to cut off your own arm. You choose to start masturbating. All of those choices would be equal, and yet they're not, because rather than doing any number of other actions, and they're presented food. This is, yeah, this is, I don't understand why so many people are opposed to these kinds of really basic logic. And all of this is establishing the existence of morality and the existence of objective morality. That's so everything that he's covered up to this point. So, and I'm going to go, the last one I'm going to cover here is support 5, and then I'm going to call it a night. Man, I still have more notes. Erg, I'm never going to get through all of this. It's going to be like a 10-part series. Okay, so let's cover support 5. Mankind is the most successful organism on the planet, and people have tried to argue against that. It doesn't make any absolute sense. It should be painfully apparent that humans are the most successful organism. Some people are arguing, yeah, bacteria can survive in the bottom of the ocean and in outer space. It doesn't matter. Humans can survive in that same bacteria can't survive in the Arctic. That same bacteria can't survive in a well, I guess volcano is probably not a, but in, okay, I should state, a single human within the human's lifetime could survive in the outer reaches of our atmosphere, possibly into space. Not quite sure on that boat. I'm yeah, whatever. That's another story. And I can think that without being anti-science. It's, yeah, actually, yeah. It's a whole nother argument. I shouldn't have said it, but yeah, humans can live in a zero-G environment with no oxygen, alarming amounts of radiation. Yes, we've done that before. That same human within that same lifetime could also go to the bottom of the ocean. That same human within that same lifetime could go inside of an active volcano and survive the temperature. The same person could also live at the North Pole or the South Pole for a year. Within one human lifetime, a single person could do all of those things and also go to the Bahamas and live there, and go to any type, could go to the Sahara Desert here. A single individual could do all of these things for a year-long period during a human lifetime. Now, when people say, oh, well, certain bacteria can live in outer space and in the depths of the ocean, yeah, that same bacteria cannot live in a volcano or in a area with temperature. The same bacteria cannot live in some, any other types of environments. And yet a human is bound by their biology to determine their external conditions. We shape the environment to fit our needs, and we are the best at shaping the environment to fit our needs. Which is how we have sent people to the outer reaches of our atmosphere. We have sent people to the bottom of the ocean. We have sent people inside of volcanoes to test and monitor them. We have sent people to the desert. Again, we have sent people to Antarctica. Every type of extreme weather condition, we have people there. We have people there for prolonged periods of time. So it doesn't matter if certain organisms under certain extreme, like, we survive in the most amount of environments. We survive in the most we have the most ability to adapt to our environments or make our environments, because we have the ability to make our us. This is what AC is. This is indoors. The entire idea of making a climate that suits our preferences rather than being bombarded by what the environment that nature gives us. Okay, Yeah. So this argument goes on. Yeah. So our ability. So yeah, people have tried to make arguments as like, well, the giraffe is superior in its ability to get leaves because it's not. I'm like, are you kidding me? Can a giraffe drive a combine and go and chop down thousands of trees in an hour? No, no, giraffe. The giraffe, the entire species can't compete with the actions of a single individual human with the machine. Doesn't matter if a giraffe has a long neck. It's completely irrelevant, and it's a stupid argument to bring up because because humans have machines. We have technology. We have these tools at our disposal. We Anything a giraffe can do, we can do better. But these idiots try to confine things like, oh, well, a cheetah is really, really fast. What human can run faster than a cheetah? I'm like, any human who's ever been on a plane has gone faster than a cheetah. Several times over. I forget how fast do planes go, several thousand miles, whereas cheetahs, what, 80 miles per hour, something like that? Yeah. We win. We win the speed competition. Now, if you're talking about just like trying to outrun physically, no, we're going to lose to the cheetah, but that doesn't matter because we have technology. I can drive faster than a cheetah. I don't need to get on a plane to go faster than a cheetah. Silly. It's just absolutely silly to make such comparisons and put such like, oh, so because they would give advantages to beavers and their ability to build dams, and I was like we can build anything out of any material. Beavers are limited to building things out of wood and mud and whatever else they can find in their inhabitants. We can build things from asteroids. Like that's one of the things we're planning on doing is sending drones out to mine asteroids to take their materials, bring them back to Earth so we can build stuff out of them. Yeah, it's not even close. Not even close. The next closest thing to us would I don't even know what the next potential candidate, like maybe bacterias and their ability to survive in multiple environments, but they get defeated by temperatures over 106 degrees, 110 degrees. Humans could survive temperatures, over 200 degrees. So good luck finding a bacteria that could survive at over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, not 200. Yeah, I mean, if you went 700 degrees, sounds ridiculously high. But I don't even know what that would approximate. That sounds like melting surface of the sun or something like that. Maybe not quite 200 degrees Celsius, but definitely 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Provide, like, again, a suit, some kind of material between us and that thing to let us survive in those types of environments. Maybe 200. No, because people work with steel that is hotter than 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Anyway, so let's see. So most successful species, people have tried to argue against this because people are dumb and they're focusing on, well, objectively, it's not even a contest. We as a species are in a position, due to our ability to adhere to the UPB, to adapt to our environment to support our UPB. If UPB were not valid, our ability to think and adapt to adhere to a specific set of UPBs would offer us no survival advantage in comparison to other species. Again, this is me using my words to encapsulate the ideas being expressed by Stefan. So if UPB was not valid, our ability to think and to shape our environment wouldn't matter. All the things that we do, and it wouldn't help our chances of survival. And yet, the more we increase our technological knowledge, the better we get at these things, the more humans total we have. Our ability to sustain ourselves is increased. Our ability to prolong our life expectancy, our ability to survive in more and more diverse environments increases, which means our ability to think and act and to reason that these specific actions, by taking specific actions, and our ability to think of what actions we can take, gives us an advantage far beyond any other species. So since we do have a survival advantage, not because of our inherent traits meaning our biological, like our biology doesn't allow us to breathe water and also breathe on land. Our biology does not give us that, but our trait, as in our ability to think, has given us ways to bring oxygen tanks with us underwater. But rather, our ability to choose. So let me continue this. So we do not have a survival advantage, or we do have a survival advantage, but it's not because of our inherent traits or our biology, but rather our ability to choose advantageous behaviors. This is what makes so this leads us to conclude that UPB must be valid, because our ability to choose advantageous behaviors, those behaviors which would be universally preferable over all the other options we could choose, our ability to choose those behaviors. Okay, so that was the last of the supports, and okay, it's already 9:10. I do have to shave and shower before I go to bed. Okay, I think I'm gonna touch on this last paragraph, and then I'm gonna call it after this. So, because I think this is important. So all of that, everything that I touched on, well, actually, before I get to that particular point, maybe I'll read these two paragraphs, because one is, they're both rather short. So Stefan acknowledges that adhering to UPB is entirely optional. This is where a lot of people weren't getting what Stefan was talking about. And this is where a lot of people go astray when they're talking about, like, well, some people choose not to. I'm like, yeah, it's because optional. Optional. So UPB are entirely optional. Yes, people can choose not to eat. People can choose not to breathe. That doesn't invalidate UPB. So so the comparison is no requirement to follow the scientific method. People make claims that and I talked about this with my brother yesterday. People make claims that crystals will protect your spiritual well-being. That, if you want protection from, from cancer, rub these crystals on yourself. And they try to back that up with scientific claims. Is like, well, it's got this property on it. It's all mystical nonsense, pseudoscience, mumbo jumbo stuff. Those people are not following the scientific method. Nothing is forcing them to follow the scientific method. If they were following the scientific method, all of their claims about the powers of crystals would be completely rendered false. Yeah, it's like, yeah, objectively, none of this is true. And if you followed the scientific method, you couldn't make the claims, and you would sell these crazy. People choose not to follow the scientific method and to make absurd claims that are not objective. Yeah, that happens. There is no police that comes in. There's no lightning strike when somebody doesn't use the scientific method, right? Oh, whether you believe in God or not, you're like, what holds somebody bound that they have to adhere to the scientific method? Nothing. So, to ignore objective ways of proving things. People do this all the time with arguments, like what JF was doing and what the Sven guy were doing. They were not following the objective rules for argumentation. They were committing fallacies. Now, a valid argument cannot commit fallacy. So anybody who's committing a fallacy isn't following the rules of a valid argument. valid arguments is entirely optional. You see so many people right now making arguments from emotion. Oh, that hurts my feelings. How dare I'm triggered? That's not an argument. That's not valid. But people do that. There's nothing forcing them to make valid arguments. People make arguments from emotion, which are not valid. Those are fallacies. There is no force or magnetic propulsion. There's nothing that makes people adhere to objective standards. I guess I shouldn't say there's nothing, but so there is no natural force, I should say. There's no natural force that makes people adhere to objective standards. That's a better way of stating it. The scientific method exists. The scientific method is objective. People choose not to use it. The structure of a proper argument is objective. People choose to ignore it when making arguments. That doesn't mean that the scientific method isn't objective. It doesn't mean that proper arguments are not objective. It just means people are choosing to ignore, not to use those structures. Okay. So the issue becomes, if you choose to propose a valid scientific theory, you must follow it. And scientists and people who hold to the view that objective truths exist will require for your claim to follow and adhere to the scientific method. That is what keeps people in check for these optional systems. If somebody makes a claim about the scientific nature of reality, people will say, what is your proof or argument? And people support their arguments by following the scientific method. Anybody who tries to support their scientific claim without following the scientific method is rejected. That has become the norm, but that was not the norm throughout human history. Many people made claims that were scientific in nature and then backed them up by saying, our God said this, our religion proposes this, I believe this, or well, some people even said this is true, and if you don't believe me, I'm going to beat you over the head, or I'm going to kill your family. This is true, or else I'm going to do something bad to you. That's the majority of human history. The scientific method hasn't been around for all that long. You're talking, when does scientific method actually propose? Like, I want to say this is something like it's like less than 1,000 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Okay, yeah. In a let's see. So yeah, it was around the 1200s. So it's not even 1,000 years old yet. Yeah, so the Dark Ages. You're talking about the scientific method is around the Dark Ages. That's when it emerged. So it's this particular thing says 1214, and Roger Bacon is credited as the first scholar to promote it, which means it was probably around for about 50 years-ish before then. Still, the scientific method is less than 1,000 years old. Before that, there was no objective standard for proving statements of objective reality when you're talking about the physical reality. Okay, nobody's in the chat. Yeah, I'm just talking myself. Apparently, double checking all that. So, man, dude, it's already 9:20. So, prior to the scientific method being adopted as the norm for determining objective truths about the physical world, what did people do? They just made claims, and that's what we're talking about. Like that's what people are doing right now when it comes to morality. You got nut jobs out there who are saying immoral to stake. Why? What is the basis? And then they make appeals to emotion. That's not convincing to me. That's not convincing to anybody. If they came and they followed the UPB and were able to prove to me in a step-by-step process that, yeah, that claim is a valid moral claim, well, I mean, if they could prove it with the UPB, which I don't think they can, if they found some way to prove it using this scientific method, I'd be like, oh, you know what? I thought the other way around. I thought it was perfectly acceptable to eat meat, but you've just made a clear case. You followed the proper methodology, the methodology that I'm going to adhere to, or at least accept for them. And if they were to do something like that, yeah, I would have to change my behavior so that it would match accordance with that objective morality. Okay, so let's apply that to the scientific method. Somebody states something that seems absurd, and they demonstrate and they follow proper scientific procedures using the scientific method. They've got their proofs, they've got their evidence, they've got their testing, and I go and I test for myself and I get the same results. Now, I'd be an absolute idiot to keep pretending that what their claim isn't the truth. Because, okay, they've followed every possible way of proving that this is objectively true. I've seen it for myself. I would be a lunatic to continue to hold the beliefs that I had prior to this evidence. Saying an objective argument, which actually that kind of precedes the scientific method. Valid objective arguments have to follow that rigid philosophical, well, it's called the Socratic method when you're talking about argumentation. It has to follow that specific procedure in order to be considered a valid argument. So if somebody is trying to argue something with me and they follow a proper Socratic argument, making valid arguments within the bounds of the Socratic method, well, then they're going to convince me that I am wrong and they were right. If somebody tries to make an argument and all they're doing is appeals to emotion and they're making fallacious arguments and they're like, oh, you should think the way I do. At the end, I'm just going to be like, no, you're a crazy person. If you want to convince me, you have to follow the Socratic method to do so. You have to follow the rules of valid argumentation, and that's the only way you're going to convince me that your particular viewpoint is preferable to my particular viewpoint. So, yeah, you would do that with an argument. You would do that, you would follow the science structure of UPB as the method when it comes to moral claims. Because people make argumentative claims, and when they make a valid argument within the Socratic method, it becomes adopted as a standard position for people who adhere to those objective standards. When somebody makes a scientific claim, and that scientific claim falls within the realm of the scientific method, and provable within the realms of the scientific method, then people who understand the scientific method and accept it as a way of validating scientific claims will adhere to that theory. What Stefan is proposing is that we follow the same kind of structure for morality. This is the framework. Anybody who believes in objective reality, anybody who believes in objective argument and reasoning, well, here's objectives when it comes to morality. Follow this framework. When somebody's trying to make a moral claim, they have to operate within this framework. And if they don't operate within this framework, then you reject their claim. It might be the case that their claim is true, but if they're not operating within this realm, they haven't proven it, and then can make a scientific claim, and they're just spouting it as absurd. You know, they're saying, okay, somebody can make a scientific claim and say, well, God said so. That doesn't prove it objectively. That proves it to people who believe in God. It does not prove it to people who don't believe in God. So if you want to prove something to people who don't believe in God, well, do they accept the scientific method as a valid method for proving objective facts? Okay, they do. Okay, then you follow the scientific method and you get the results and like, okay, that thing that I said, well, God said it, yeah, but it fits within the scientific method, so it doesn't. You choose whichever one you prefer. If you prefer because God said so and that's good enough for you, then oh well. If you say, objective truths have to follow the scientific method, well, it's follow the scientific method and it's subjectively true, so you should accept that. If you reject God and the scientific method, well, then, well, screw you, because there's no way to prove something to you, at least when it comes to physical facts. So let's try the same thing with morality. Okay, some people are perfectly fine with saying, God said this is immoral, therefore it's immoral. God said this is moral, therefore it's moral. Okay, people who believe in God will accept that. People who don't believe in God, what do they have? They've got nothing. They don't have the equivalent of this scientific method at the moment. So Stefan is proposing this UPB as the okay. You can come here, you can fit this framework around a moral claim. You can trust this moral claim because it has proven itself in other areas in successful moral conclusions. It's got to fit the, what is this? So it's got to be, I think this might be wrong. Yeah, so this is something later on that he's touching here. But so I'm going to quote him directly. So if a moral theory fails to explain the past, understand the present, and predict the future, it must be rejected as invalid. That's a little bit later, but dude, sorry, 9:25. I need to stop talking. I'm a windbag sometimes. Okay. All right, wrap this up in the next 4 minutes. Yeah. So what he's proposing is a system that would prove itself in that manner, so that way people who don't believe in God could be like, well, at least they could put faith in this particular system. And they could be like, okay, prove it to me with, like, same way that people say, prove it to me using the scientific method. People would come and say, okay, that's a moral claim. You claim it's because God said so. I don't believe in God. Prove it to me using the UPB. That would be a step above what we have right now, right? What we have right now is people saying, oh, morals are relative, yet you're wrong. This doesn't make any damn sense. Because you're wrong is your actions right now are incorrect. That's a moral claim. And yet they said, like, but morals are relative. Well, then how can you make a moral claim? It's absolutely idiotic. Okay. Yeah. And so the assigned method is optional as well, but it doesn't make it subjective. So he's saying he's given enough proof that UPB is valid. UPB actually is consistent. There is evidence to support it. There argumentation to support it. So it is optional, but that doesn't make it subjective. All right, last point I want to touch on is, so everything I've talked about within last week and this week just establishes that morality is valid, and it can be objective. So that moves the question on to, what would those valid objective morals be, and how do we determine them objectively? Ugh. Man, that is too much time just to get to want to be stupid. People want to be absolute idiots and just reject the idea of objective morals to begin with without any valid reason for doing so. Way too much work to lay the groundwork here. And it seems like a losing fight to try to convince people so opposed to this statement, to get to this point that morals exist and that morals can be objective. Hours and pages of a book just to get to that point, which is something that should be so obvious and uncontroversial. And yet that is where people are fighting against this idea tooth and nail. Absolutely ridiculous. Okay. All right. Well, It is 9:30. I'm gonna call it a night. I spent way too long talking about myself. A little bit about myself, but arguing these ideas. But these are things that interest me, that I am passionate about, and this is the stuff that I would like to talk about more on my streams instead of silly nonsense about AOC and Smollett. And because while those are interesting and funny, in the long run, I don't care. Those things are drop in the plan. You forget about them in a week. They're not important. They might as well be talks about the weather or nonsense about um, might as well be high school gossip about who's dating who. This is something that does matter in the long run, because if this is let's see, if he has succeeded, and I think for the most part he has. I think that does need some refinement, some, it's not perfect, but it's really good. It is a really good framework for establishing such a method. If there is such a method for proving things to people who do not believe in God, to prove, hey, this is a framework that you can trust and you can use this to predict more. If he has succeeded at that, that is an amazing accomplishment. And then it gives us an avenue to try to solve things. Right now, when it comes to the subject of morality, because they just had this thing that happened in Congress where there was a law proposed. Children who are born alive should be protected under the Constitution, and it was voted down. Born alive. Living, breathing humans. Rejected as being protected by our government. And yet we can't come to an agreement that that is what happens and that those humans should be protected probably more than any other human. The ones who, no matter what, cannot. And it was voted that, nope, we're just going to let them be. We have no obligation to try to save them, no obligation to try to keep them alive. But if we had a standard for the people who don't believe in God, and they would have to look at that, and we'd have to rub it in their faces and be like, look, this is objectively murder. What you just voted on is objectively killing babies. And that is so diabolically wrong. And if we could prove that using a standard that they would be willing to accept. And if they choose to reject it after that point, then they are a crazy person. In the same way that you would say somebody who, believes, well, let's see, trying to come up with a crazy sciencey thing. Like someone who believes that aliens are shoving things up or abducting people and shoving things up their anuses. Someone who would believe that is a crazy person. You can, let's see, trying to come up with something that's a little less controversial. Okay, something that is objective, and so let's get. I was going to use mathematics, but I've tried to use that argument before, and idiots, for some reason, don't understand that 1 plus 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, and somebody who says 1 plus 1 equals 3 is a crazy person. Yeah. But that's not quite the scientific method. Let's try to find something within the realm of scientific method. Okay, you can scientifically prove that an atom is made of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and then electrons orbit around the protons and neutrons of the, was it nucleus? No, that's not the right word. This is a cell, right? Oh, man. It's been too long since I did basic. Uh, oh, okay. Oh, you can scientifically prove that water is made of a combination of hydrogen, two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. You can scientifically prove that. You can prove that using the scientific method. You can take somebody through all the steps, and if they still say, if after going through all of that, if somebody says no, water is made up of fairy dust or some other, yeah, somebody says nope, water's not made up of hydrogen and two hydrogens and one oxygen atom. If somebody outright rejects that, that person's a crazy person. You can dismiss them. You can try to prove it to them. If they won't accept that, that's the best you can do. Be similar in the case of morality. But okay, somebody who, if you found somebody who said that water wasn't made up of hydrogen and oxygen, and after explaining to someone, they still insist, no, it's it's the work of whatever I'm going to say, Poseidon. Nope, it's the blood droplets of Poseidon. And somebody still keeps claiming that and says the scientific method is invalid. You can dismiss them as a crazy person and not accept anything else that they would propose when it comes to the realm of science. It's in the same manner. We had an objective standard for proving morality. Somebody makes, and you make this objective case for murder being immoral, and that killing and that allowing an infant to die when it was born alive, making the case that that is immoral, and they still reject that claim, well, then that person gets tossed off to the side in the same way as somebody who says that water is the blood of Poseidon, or is, the tears of Poseidon, or some not crazy nonsense, and says that, oh, it's definitely not, and two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. Somebody who's that crazy wouldn't get into a place of power, wouldn't get into office, wouldn't be allowed to vote on a bill that would allow living children to die. Because what the bill is basically saying doctors can abandon children if they are born alive and the mother did not want them. That's legal in the U.S. currently. Congress put it to a vote to make that illegal. Now, I would hope that doctors, while they legally can abandon the child, I would hope the majority of doctors in this country would just ignore what is legal and do what is right. But my objection right now is not to the fact that it is currently illegal for this to go on. My objection is for the people who would vote, when it came to a vote, they would vote on the side of keeping that thing legal. That's a problem. And if we can prove that these things are objectively immoral, and Democrats and these idiot like AOC continue to say, nope, that's not true, you can't prove that to me, and they keep making random claims about her body, her choice, when the infant is outside of her body and is completely separated at this point, completely its own individual, own autonomous individual. Those people who would make claims like that would be dismissed like crazy people, like the guy wearing the tinfoil hat that lives under the bridge and pisses and drinks his own urine. They would be in the same category as those people. Like, there's a lot of people on the internet who talk about flat Earth, and they get dismissed as being lunatics and crazy people. I would say, like, the same kind of stigma should be for people like AOC and Feinstein and anybody else who voted on this, that voted to reject this bill. Those Democratic candidates, like, it was, yeah. Every single politician who voted against this, those people should be cast aside like those crazies who are ostracized by society for talking about flat Earth. Why does that sort of thing not have the same stigma? Uh, all right. Okay, it is 9:40, and I've gone way off the rails, gone way longer than expected. And like I said, I should have wrapped this up about an hour ago. But thanks to anybody who actually did watch this, and I will guess continue with part 3. And how many pages left do I have of notes? Well, I've got 2.5 pages left on these notes, and I think I've got, let's see, and I think that is only covering the first 2 hours of the audiobook. I don't think I went beyond that. I'm not sure how much more I would need to go beyond that in order to make the case, because he does go into specific examples for a lot of this. I don't think for this particular series I need to go into all of those particular examples. I think I'm going to wrap this up after establishing the framework of UPB and then giving a couple examples like, okay, you take this thing that we know is immoral, run it through here, okay, we get the immoral. We take this thing that we know is moral, we run it through, we get a moral. We take this thing that is inconsequential, we run it through, hey, it's inconsequential, that be. So hopefully I can get that done next week, next Wednesday. All right, so I'm going to close that. And all right, and interesting. I got a message from somebody who has a screen name FBI, and all it says is, "Why is the U.S. still using the metric system?" I have no idea. I am surprised liters are not being used for things other than soda. It seems to me that okay, I think somebody brought this up, is that sodas are, they're shipped around the world and not just here in the U.S. and so they use liters because it's easier to have a 2 liter of cola and then have that universally across all countries. Well, products all over the place are shipped to multiple countries. That more of a thing where they just start converting their products and like, dude, Americans, suck it up. We're going to start putting things into metric, and you're just going to have to live with it because the rest of the world uses a metric system. Uh, yeah, I am surprised more products aren't just, hey, it was in, what is it? What is ounces is the American units, right? Yeah, because I think the metric units would be, yeah. Because there's ounces and there's fluid ounces. Are either of those? No, because it's liters and mass, right? In grams, right? It's liters and grams are the metric units. Yeah, I don't know. I just know the metric system is better. It's easier once you get it. Like it's just a matter of converting that people don't want to do. But once everything is converted to metric, it won't even be a thing anymore. It'll be, yeah. Once everything is converted to metric, it won't be the way people like to change. They act like it's going to be impossible to change over to metric. I have no idea. I would just hope that more products would continually start labeling their things using metric units, and eventually that would become the standard, and then eventually people would be like, okay, well, now we've got this small subset of items or subset of things that are in stupid British standard system. That the Americans use, or that us Americans use. Then eventually would we replace all that, we replace mile with kilometers and all that sort of thing. And then once we got all that done, we might still have football fields that are measured in yards. It can be easily converted, and it just needs to be done. It's one of those things, is we just got to start incorporating more and more metric into until it becomes the standard. All right, and I'm gonna call it a night there for sure. 9:45. Wait. too long. Thanks for showing up, FBI. All right, have a good night, everybody.